Hello and welcome back to another episode of our draft series. Fun one today, NFL draft recap. We've spent so many shows preparing for the draft, talking about the quarterbacks, mock drafts, all that, but we actually have results to talk about now. And we're not just going to make our predictions and then run away. We're going to come back and talk now about some of the results of the draft. We like to do this show in an awards format. It helps us kind of hit on a lot of different topics and hit on the most interesting teams from what happened throughout this draft weekend. So we're going to alternate through. I think we've got about 15 or so awards that we'll hit on and go back and forth. So John will start, and then it'll go back over to me. We won't cover every single team, but our goal here is to cover kind of the most interesting things that happened in the draft and the things that are worth spending the most amount of time on. So John, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I guess I'll kick this one off with maybe one of the bigger surprises, and I'm going to call this award, my heart says yes, but my head says no. And this is going to be the Rams. So the Rams taking Ty Simpson at 13, I think was a real shocker. You know, people had kind of connected the dots between the Rams and Ty Simpson since the beginning of the process. His family reached out to Les Snead. Les Snead told them he thought he'd be a first-round pick. Obviously, he got other opinions about where he might go, but just really interesting that they ended up taking him here at 13. You know, I think you could point to a lot of other players that were taken after pick 13 that would have really helped the Rams push towards a Super Bowl while Matthew Stafford's still there. And we talked about it in the process with Simpson. He is really inexperienced. He's only started 1 year, and he shows a lot of high upside traits with his mental processing, not necessarily with his physical tools. So kind of a different player than Stafford. I think some of the things he does well on the field fit what the Rams want to do. So in a way it's okay, I could see this kind of working, but he needs time. He needs experience. And he's not going to get that with the Rams because they have an experienced starter that they're pushing towards Super Bowls with. So Ty Simpson, while I may not have loved it for some of the teams that did pick quarterbacks in the mid rounds, just because several of those teams, I don't know if he fits in the cold weather cities generally. They at least would have given him time on the field to see if it's going to work. And the Rams might be sitting here in 2 years thinking, okay, we got our franchise quarterback, and he hasn't seen the field, and he's still not ready, and he's halfway through his rookie contract when Stafford retires, and then he gets on the field and is bad. That could be a real outcome for the Rams. So I just don't really understand the upside to this pick for the Rams when you're trying to win right now.
Yeah, there's so many things to hit on with this pick. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time. I agree that the timeline is very interesting with this pick because, like you said, I do think you'd rather have a guy that is a little more developmental in this situation, right? You don't want a 4-year starter who's 25 to be thrown into this spot, and you're not really expecting much more development. You're kind of just wasting a few years of a rookie contract. I do think Simpson's a guy that, I said before the draft, I was I don't think this is a plug-and-play guy. I think he could really benefit from having some time to learn. But you have the flip side of that, which is he might have, by the time this is over, let's say just hypothetically, Stafford retires in 2 years, he will have played 15 games in 5 years as a starting quarterback, which is just
crazy,
just ridiculous. I mean, Mendoza played more games than that this season as a starting quarterback. That's one NFL season of experience. You're basically saying this guy has in the last 5 years, and I just don't think that's I don't think that's helpful for a quarterback. At least not as helpful as playing. I do think there's guys that benefit from getting acclimated to the NFL, but I think far too often we talk way too much about those things, and it just comes down to are you good? Are you good? And you will still have the opportunity to develop if you are playing, and oftentimes you will develop faster if you are playing. So for Simpson, I think this is kind of a mixed bag in terms of results. This is maybe the perfect place to go from a coaching scheme talent surrounding you,
Best
like
landing spot for him. For
yeah,
sure.
all that stuff. I mean, like if this team didn't have a quarterback, you'd say like there's no better possible landing spot for him. But
Well, and I'll say as an Alabama fan, it is fun to see him go to a place that has such a good system around him.
yeah,
And I feel like he does have the support he needs, but he doesn't really get the shot that he needs. So, but I interrupted you, and you made me
no,
go in here.
that's a good point. Yeah, there's so much to hit on here. I do. Is there so like there's just no way I personally can get behind this with the grade I have on Simpson. Like, I see Simpson as a late second, early third round guy. There is just no circumstance where I think taking those guys this high makes sense. I said the same thing when the Falcons drafted Penix, when McCarthy was drafted by the Vikings, when Bo Nix was drafted by the Broncos. Like, when I view guys in that bucket, I just can't get there with taking them at this point in the first round. Now, and I think you would agree, right? Like those.
Yeah, I do agree, and I also had Simpson same range, like late second, early third. If they had not traded their original first round pick, that number 29 overall, that was the one that people originally were saying, oh, they might take him at that second first round pick, house money, all that, and that I could have understood at least, where it's like, okay, maybe he's around earlier than he's supposed to go, or than the grade on him, but like you at least get the fifth year option, and you still get the swing at 13 for a better player, one that's going to help you right now. But I don't really get it at 13 at all.
Yeah, and this is why I think this one is so interesting, because Penix was the guy where like the Falcons got crucified for doing a pretty similar thing to this, where it's like, okay, you just like you kind of made a commitment to a veteran. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Stafford's an even better player than Cousins is. But you made a commitment to a veteran. You're trying to win now. And then you say, we're at a position right now where we're drafting pretty high. Let's go ahead and take the quarterback because we think this is a special opportunity to do so. We really like the player. And hopefully we'll get our guy for the future. And we are in a better position to do that now than we think we will be in future years. Mm-hmm. I have like basically zero problems with that logic. I've actually come around on that more just because quarterback is so important that like I do think the argument is true that yes, are you slightly like very marginally decreasing your Super Bowl odds this season by picking Simpson at 13? Like, yes, you are. Mekhi Lemon gives you a better chance to win the Super Bowl this year. Kenyon Sadiq or who throw whatever offensive lineman you want to throw in there. Those guys give you a better chance to win the Super Bowl this year. That is true. I think you can make an argument that a good mid-round, first-round quarterback prospect is better for your, like if you look at it from a 5-year view of like, our championship win probability over these next 5 years. Like, does drafting Simpson or insert actual good prospect in the first round, like insert that prospect, does that give you a better long-term outlook? I actually buy into that. Like, I think that's a reasonable approach just specifically for the quarterback position where they make such a big difference on your team. My problem is like that is only worth deferring if you actually think the guy's good. And like clearly the Rams do, right? So like I guess what I'm trying to say is I am completely fine with the process of we like this quarterback, we're in a position to draft him, and we think this is a more likely spot for us to grab a future quarterback than we will be in going forward years. We're going to take advantage of that. I really don't have issues with that. I just don't like the player enough to think he warrants that sort of value going to him. So I don't know. Curious to hear what you think about that logic, because I think I've come around a little bit more on that since the Falcons did it, just because the quarterback position is so important, and we do overrate the certainty of first-round picks sometimes. And everybody's talking about, oh, well, if the Rams drafted somebody else at 13, like that guy could make the difference in them winning the Super Bowl. It's like, well, yeah, but he also might like struggle to start his first season, right? Like you just
might also not be good.
Yeah, like there's uncertainty there as well.
Yeah.
But I feel way worse about Simpson as a prospect than I do the other guys that they would have taken at 13.
Yeah, I think that's where I fall on it more than anything. I can understand the argument, but I think that for a team like the Rams, where you have an elite level quarterback and you have like a very specific championship window with that quarterback, I think I do fall more in the camp of we should try to capitalize on this as much as possible. Like push the chips in the middle. We might really regret it in a couple of years, or regret's not even the right word. If you win the championship, it kind of makes it worth it, even if in a couple of years you're really bad. And they've already done this. Actually, I think the most interesting part of this is like a reverse of what the Rams kind of did.
Yeah.
Because they pushed the chips in the middle, they won the Super Bowl, and then they were really bad, and then they kind of had to take their lumps and go through a mini rebuild, and they've immediately built back up into this contender. But now it's like, okay, we're not going to do the same thing again. We're going to kind of build for the long term and take the shot on the next quarterback. I think it's interesting that they've had both philosophies under the same regime within just a few years of each other. So I haven't really heard people kind of talking about that angle on it, but I think it's interesting that you see both sides from the Rams.
Yeah, and I do still think there's a way where they can walk that line, right? Like there's a way where you can kind of, sure, if you want to like mental gymnastics yourself into it, like what if they traded their first round pick for next year at the deadline for an elite player to add to this room? Is that really that different than waiting to take your quarterback in another year, but using your first round pick on a better prospect this year, right? Like there's still ways I think they can invest in this year that don't require it being the first round pick. So I'm curious to see how that works. And like obviously they already traded one of their first round picks for a really good player in McDuffie, so they're still thinking that way. So I do think like there's still some flexibility there. It's not like the only way to improve your team was through this pick. The thing that I will say that is interesting to me is the Rams had 5 picks in this draft. So yeah, and like they picked at the end of the second round, the end of the third round, and then they didn't have another pick until the 6th round. So you're basically saying we picked probably 2 guys in this draft that have like any sort of chance at helping us in their first season. If you just look at the draft capital, I actually like the players they got in the 6th and 7th round. Like I think those guys are both interesting late round picks with Daniels and Keenan. But like if you just look at the draft capital they invested, you drafted another guy into a crowded tight end room who's I don't think will play that much his first season.
That's the other thing I was going to say is like you come back in the 2nd round and pick another tight end, and I know they want to go heavy tight ends, but like that room is so crowded. There's no guarantee he's going to see the field much this year.
Yeah, so I do think like even beyond taking Simpson, I'm still not sure this draft is a very win now type of approach, and that's what I think is really interesting to me. I think you can make an argument like, hey, their roster's so good now, like let's let it ride with these guys and like let's try to shore it up in future years. Like I think that's a reasonable approach, but like you said, that's not how they've approached things in the past. Their approach in the past was like, hey, like we can win the Super Bowl this year. Like let's go get Jalen Ramsey. Let's go get Odell Beckham.
I mean, they were throwing away picks with reckless abandon.
Yeah, let's go get Von Miller, right? Like over and over. That is what they did, and this is a different approach from that for sure.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on the Rams draft? Obviously, like anytime a guy like this goes in the first round, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned Keenan. Keenan was one that I thought might go a little higher, just like he's not going to be an elite. He doesn't really bring any pass rush upside, but I think he's going to be one of those solid, like he's just kind of a rock in the middle of the field against the run. I feel like even if it's not with the Rams, he's going to latch on somewhere as that like a rotational defensive tackle.
Yeah.
But, yeah. It just not really understanding the process.
All right, let's move into my first award. This one is probably a little more straightforward. That kind of comes with the nature of this. That my award title for this is same old, same old. These are basically the teams when they draft, you're sitting there and you're thinking, I think I can probably guess what they're going to do here. And then they do it, and you're like, yep, and it's probably going to work. Like, they'll probably take advantage of it. So the 2 teams that I had here were the Ravens and the Eagles. I'll start with the Ravens. I think every single person in the world had them taking Vega Ione, the guard out of Penn State, at 14. They do it, right? They so consistently take in the first round the really good player at a position of need that is probably a little bit less valuable positionally. They did it with Kyle Hamilton. They did it with Linderbaum. Like, they find ways to hit on these guys. I think this one will probably be another really good player. They've had more trouble when they've stepped outside of that, honestly, with like the Bateman first round pick. Nate Wiggins has been really good, but like Hollywood Brown, like when they try to go like get a little more creative in the first round is usually when it doesn't work for them. So you have that to start with, and then the rest of the class, I think you see it again. The second round, I feel like so many years now, the second round is like some sort of really athletic defensive lineman with a little bit of questionable character or background. And this year's no different with Zion Young. Not necessarily as like serious background as maybe some other guys, but some of the clips of him and his quotes are just like wild. Like there's like clips of him at like the coin toss just like screaming at opposing players and all this stuff. Like he's an interesting guy for sure. I will say the last thing I'll call out in their draft class that I do think is one final kind of staple of their draft is they are pretty good about, and we'll get into this with the Jags discussion probably later, like they're pretty good about just being willing to take the guys that fall. Like Eric DaCosta was on a podcast not long ago talking about the idea of the winner's curse and like, the idea that usually if you're having to like trade up to give value to get up to a higher player, that player's probably not going to be much better than the guy that you could have just waited to pick. So having more swings at it in the draft is the best approach. They did that again this year. They made, I think, 10 selections this year. And I think Elijah Surratt's probably the best example of that, where a guy that they just were patient and let fall to them in the fourth round, get a really solid, like big-bodied slot possession receiver. It's been a while since we've had good receivers that I feel like can catch the football. It's just like an epidemic in Baltimore. Like the only guys that can catch are when like it's 100-year-old DeAndre Hopkins who just like can't get more than a foot of separation. So like very excited about that. Jacoby Lane was an interesting pick to me in the third round because I think he was much more of a reach, but I understand that like they really wanted some bigger bodied ball winning receivers.
Yeah.
And I think you've just seen how much they've missed that over the past couple of years. So overall, very Ravens draft. All the staples were checked off in the first few rounds there.
Yeah, you kind of nailed it with the analysis on the class. I kind of like it. I generally like the Ravens process. To your point, they're willing to just take the guys that fall to them. And I think that is much more sound than like trying to move around the board too much. They rarely trade up for guys when they have. It has worked out at times, but they tend to just stay put and take the guys that fall to them. They're also big fans of, the comp picks as well. And they end up usually stockpiling picks. I will say with Zion Young, it's kind of an interesting fit because you kind of needed the run defense presence, and I think he kind of brings that.
Yeah.
So I think it really fits with Trey Hendrickson's skill set. Just kind of as an interesting point. And then you get the two tight ends in the mid rounds to kind of replace the tight ends that they just lost in free agency, who I think will be like pretty good players. They tend to hit on those kind of guys as well. I think you kind of crushed it with your naming too, because these picks are exactly what you would expect them to make, and I think will help them this year.
Yeah, one thing I generally like the Ravens do, and I think this is a good strategy, is they're willing to take like multiple guys at the same position close to each other in drafts and assume just because we took one tight end in the fourth round doesn't mean we found a good tight end, right? Like the odds this guy's good those odds are still pretty low. So we can take a few of these guys, and if we run into a positional logjam, like great. That means we somehow hit on multiple mid-round tight ends. They did that. They drafted Likely and Kolar in the same draft, who have now come up for free agency, and like Likely was the more impactful player for them. More like Kolar had a role as well, but that I think that philosophy makes sense, especially when you have positions of need. They did the same thing, doubling up at wide receiver in the mid rounds. Like if you didn't have a chance to get a guy at the top of your board that you feel good about, then I think taking swings like that is just the best way to approach it. So definitely. Another part of their philosophy that I think makes sense. All right, let's get to the Eagles. They also they're just one of those teams. They do the same thing every year. I think every year they take a guy in the first round where you're like, how did he get to them? This year it was like them trading up to 20 to take Mekhi Lemon, who I'm not as high on. Like, I actually think that's a fair spot for Lemon, but I think most people expected him to be gone before pick 20. They take a couple just like ridiculous tools guys in the second and third round with Stowers at tight end, who's just like a freak athlete, and then Markel Bell, who is like about the biggest human you will ever see to play left tackle from Miami. They take him in the third round. This also fits to me a broader thing that I appreciate that the Eagles do, which is they are so good at roster building, and Roseman is such a good GM that they draft guys a year early to meet their needs instead of having to meet their need that year. And it just gives you so much more flexibility. Obviously, like, you have to get ahead of this by a year by building an exceptional roster to be able to do this. But like, they're drafting for needs in the second and third round that aren't needs right now. They're just, we think this might be a need in a year. Like, oh, Dallas Goedert's probably going to be gone after this year, so let's go ahead and draft his replacement. Oh, Lane Johnson might be starting to get banged up to the point where maybe we can't expect that many more years out of him. Let's go ahead and draft another tackle that we think could be his long-term replacement. Yeah. They do this at quarterback every year as well. They'll draft somebody that's an interesting project. They've had history drafting North Dakota State quarterbacks, so like, not surprised Cole Payton.
Factory.
Yeah, like, they do this every year. Cole Payton was their guy this year. I think it's a fine swing in the fifth round. I had a fifth round grade on him, so like, yeah, I think that one made sense, and is a guy that has enough tools where you can get excited about developing him and see what you have in a couple years. And then to top it all off, they draft I don't even know how to say this. Is it Uar?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Uar Bernard who's from like the International Pathway Program. Mm-hmm. This is like the fifth to last pick in the seventh round. Like, odds are this guy never plays any meaningful football. But he is like...
Oh, he's never played meaningful football. He's never played any football before.
Yeah. Yeah. He is like... If you haven't heard of this guy, his first name is spelled U-A-R, like Uar Bernard. His testing numbers are like... I don't know if I've ever seen more impressive testing numbers than this. He tested like Myles Garrett at 30 pounds heavier, which is just like, I don't even know how that's possible. This guy may never be good enough at football for it to matter, but this is like just a very typical Eagles draft in that I feel like in the mid to late rounds they were taking, it's all like high upside swings, right? It's guys that, if we hit on two of these players, then we've had a great draft, right? And you fill your needs a year early instead of a year late. I don't feel super strongly about like Lemon as a prospect to where I would give this like an A+ draft for the Eagles or anything, but they nailed exactly what they set out to do.
Yeah, I think that this is like, at the very least, like a B+ draft, and it has the upside to, like, in a couple of years look like one of the better classes, just depending on how some of these guys break. Like, if the development goes right for Stowers and Bell, if you get anything out of some of the more project guys later, like this class could end up looking really, really good. And I think it's Mekhi Lemon, not my favorite prospect in the class either, but he probably will be good. And I don't know, maybe this is like an indication of the incoming AJ Brown trade.
He's gone.
About.
Yeah.
I think that might be part of why Lemon is there too. It's like, okay, we have made this trade. It's just not finalized till post-June 1. So
the one thing that is a little interesting to me about this draft is I think both of your first two picks here, Mekhi Lemon and Eli Stowers, are both guys you would draft if you're saying that you are trying to attack the middle of the field more.
Yeah.
And your quarterback is allergic to throwing the ball over the middle of the field. So I am very interested this year to see, does this indicate that the Eagles are going to try to force Hurts to play a little more traditional style of quarterback, which is something that has been reported that he has resisted to this point. He wants to play his specific style, which has been effective when you have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside and one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. But are they going to push Hurts to play a little bit more of a traditional over the middle of the field drop back game, I think these draft picks would make you think that, because I don't think Lemon is going to be a good player if you just line him up on the outside and tell him to run a bunch of go routes. Like, that's just a horrible idea. So based on these guys they drafted, I do think that this makes me think a little bit differently about how the Eagles will play offense next year.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think they are trying to force Hurts to throw over the middle of the field. Like, okay, you don't have A.J. Brown anymore, so you have to play differently to make it work.
Yeah. And if you don't, we got Cole Payton ready to go. All right, what's your next award?
All right, let me pick one out here. Let's go with, I think this is a quicker one, but I just marked it as the saddest pick of specifically of the first round, but maybe of the draft. And I'm going to give it to the Seahawks with Jadarian Price. I think it's one that, like, I understand some of the logic behind it. I still don't know if I would have done it, but they feel like they have a real need at running back and a guy who, like, actually definitely can contribute this year. And Jadarian Price was, like, the only other one that teams saw as starters, as a starter after Jeremiah Love. So it's almost like, okay, we're at 32. We just won the Super Bowl. We really have to get somebody who can come in and play running back this year, and not like we need to let him kind of develop and get some, like, a couple of carries. Like, he needs to play. Jadarian Price can theoretically do that right now. So they just had to take him at the end of the first round. I don't think it really is great for, like, really boosting your team a lot, but at least kind of solidifies your floor as a team, I guess, is the thought behind it. I still don't love it personally. That's why I called it the saddest pick here. But
yeah, I probably still wouldn't have done it, but I do understand why they talked themselves into it, because like you said, this is probably the weakest running back class I can ever remember since I've started following the draft. This was the latest that the third running back was selected, I think maybe ever in the draft. And so there just wasn't anybody behind the two Notre Dame running backs that Seattle felt good enough about taking to potentially be their starter. So, and they have a real need at running back with Walker being gone. I think Charbonnet is likely to miss time this year as well.
A little bit at the beginning of the year.
So like it's like they have nobody that's like even remotely qualified to be a starting running back. And because the rest of their team is so stacked, then you can say, okay, we probably can forego.
Have this one hole. Fill.
So I completely understand why they did it. They were trying to trade out like crazy, and all the picks before them, teams traded into it, and I think they probably just ran out of teams that were interested in trading up, so they end up picking in the first round. So yeah, like you said, I don't have major issues with this. We'll get to another team that took a running back that I think I'll have more to say about, but the Seahawks here, to me, like, I understand why you ended up where you did. I just think if the chips had fallen differently, like if you simulate this draft 1,000 times, I do think this is like one of the worst outcomes for them, because they couldn't find a partner to trade up with, and because of that, they end up having to stick and pick a guy probably a little earlier than they would have had to if things had fallen differently.
Yeah, I think they would have loved to trade back and try to get him somewhere in the top to mid of the second round.
Yeah,
but just wasn't in the cards for them.
All right, I will go next. The next award that I will do is the Just Ignore Our First Draft Pick award, and that goes to the Miami Dolphins. I think outside of their first pick, I really like their class. They also did, which they had a million picks in this class, right? So like this is one of those teams where you kind of have to remember, like, okay, yeah, their draft class is going to look better than most teams' draft classes because they took twice as many players as other teams. So you have to grade them on a scale a little bit, but I like what they did overall, consistently attacking needs. Like, they took 2 wide receivers in the 3rd round. They took another wide receiver in the 5th round. I think all those guys are interesting players. They were willing to take shots on guys that had some lingering injuries that may have fallen because of that, with the understanding that we're not really a team that's trying to win this year anyways. So if we can get a guy on a discount for better long-term value, let's do it. I think the picks after, we'll get to Proctor. I think Chris Johnson at the end of the 1st round, makes a ton of sense. He's
Yeah.
a very like zone heavy corner. That's what they're going to run in Miami. Like good fit there. Jacob Rodriguez in the second round, also a guy that like tested way better than people expected, and I think is a solid pick there. They came back around and took another linebacker from Texas in the fourth round. So overall, like I think this is a fun draft. You get a lot of guys in that I think have a legit chance to play at the NFL level, and you did pretty well with the volume of picks you had. Proctor is the one that I think is really interesting because the one argument that I will concede in this is they don't need him to be good in his first year, right? Like they don't care if they win next year. So drafting a guy with crazy high upside, like completely understand the argument for that. Some of the like character stuff that I heard, like that people were talking about with Proctor leading up to the draft just like kind of scares me to death
really
about
concerning. Yeah.
the like not may not like love football, may not really be interested in maintaining good conditioning until he gets to camp, and then you gotta figure it out at that point. And for a guy that reportedly might have played around 380 last year, I'm just like that is super concerning to me. And he if he doesn't get to like 360 or below consistently, he just won't be good enough to play in the NFL. So I understand why they're excited about Proctor, and if anybody's going to take a shot on him, I could see you talking yourself into the Dolphins because they've got picks to burn. They don't have a win now type of approach, but I still think there's just other tackles that were on the board at 12 that I would have rather like. I think Freeling has similar upside and does not scare me nearly as much as Proctor.
Yeah, I actually feel the same way about Proctor. You go back and watch the early games last year, especially like the Florida State game, and you could tell like he was definitely too big. He was not moving well. It really affected him. And, this is not the first year it's happened. He reportedly has played close to 400 at times at Alabama. So, like, he had a real conditioning problem. And I don't know that you can really tell yourself with certainty that that's going to go away, that he's just going to figure out how to maintain that. And it wasn't just a couple of people or conjecture. Like, Nick Saban said this.
Yeah.
Nick Saban was telling people like, oh yeah, he is not a guy that's going to come in shape. Well, that's a problem if not even Nick Saban can get him to do that. So, Caden Proctor, again, as an Alabama fan, happy for him. I would not have picked him this high. There are several other tackles in the first round that I would have taken over Proctor. But to your point, I do actually like the rest of their draft. And you talked about with the Ravens taking multiple swings at positions. They took a couple of defensive backs, couple linebackers, 3 receivers, couple tight ends, couple edges, like a couple offensive linemen. They took a lot of swings at a lot of different positions of real need for the Dolphins. Like, I mean, you say of need. They kind of need everything.
Yeah.
They are in a really bad spot with their roster, but taking multiple shots at these guys gives them much better chances of a few of them working out and few of them turning into good starters for your team. So taking a lot of picks, a lot of swings, I like that process overall.
All right, who you got?
All right, next for me, we'll go with the most confusing process, worst process award, whatever that is. This is on the back of the Jadarian Price discussion, but we're going to talk about the Cards. The Arizona Cardinals, Jeremiah Love at 3. I know that, it may have been, they may have tried to trade out of the pick. They may have really not wanted to take him quite here, but they did. And I think it's indefensible. Only from the like, he probably will be a good player, but he is immediately the 7th highest paid running back in the NFL. You don't know that he's going to be the 7th best running back in the NFL. He might be a top 3 running back. Who knows? But he might also he might struggle. Like, it happens all the time with guys that we think are surefire things. And the Arizona Cardinals should know that because they just took Marvin Harrison Jr., who everybody thought was like a surefire, this guy's going to be good even if he's not a stud. And he struggled so far. So, like, I think Jeremiah Love is a better prospect than that. Like, I think that we have a little more confirmation he's going to be good. But you also guaranteed him the most money ever to a running back. Like, more guaranteed money by a lot than guys like Saquon Barkley, guys like Derrick Henry. You can't do that with a rookie. And like that, this is immediately like a failing grade. And then you come back, like, I think Besantis in the second round is fine. But you come back in the third round with Carson Beck at the first pick of the third round. If you think he's your starter, why is he a third round pick? Third round pick screams, we think that this guy might get on the field and might turn into a startable quarterback, but we're not sure. Like, we really don't plan on starting this guy right away. I didn't really see it with Beck. I did not really like the tape. We had him much later than that. I forget where exactly I landed on him, but I think I had him like the 5th to 6th round range. Taking him at the top of the third round when there were a lot of other good players on the board and you are a team with a lot of needs, again, indefensible. I cannot explain it. Like, I understand taking the swings at quarterback, and we're going to talk about that with some other teams, but when you've already taken a running back at the third pick, and this is only your third pick in the third round, like, you're not one of these teams that is stockpiled and has a ton of first and second round picks to kind of insulate against this being wrong. You kind of need Carson Beck to be good at this point, or this pick is just thrown away completely. So, the rest of the draft, I think you could point to like a couple players being pretty good values. Like Caleb Proctor might end up actually being a pretty good player in the fourth round, but the first and third round picks just make this process an absolute no-go for me. Like, I could never do this.
Yeah, let's start with the running back, and then I'll get to Beck too. I think what you said about Love, there's two separate arguments against taking a running back this high, and both of them apply here, which are, the first one is you shouldn't draft a running back when your team is not ready to compete right now, which, by the way, is true for like every team picking in the top 10 pretty much. Yeah. But like, even set that aside for a minute.
Last year, but
yeah, let's set that aside for a minute and say, for the Cardinals, that's especially true. Their roster stinks. They're probably the favorite to have the number one pick next year. It's probably them or Miami as the worst two teams in the league. So, general thought process would say, if you don't have a good offensive line, it doesn't matter how good the running back is. We saw it with Genty last year. We saw it with Saquon in his rookie year. There's only so much an elite running back talent can overcome. There's just a limit on that based on your offensive line that you have. And so you should wait to take those guys, or wait to take a running back early, or pay a running back until you think your team is good enough where the running back can be that ceiling raiser instead of the guy that you're hoping will raise your floor. And Saquon's, again, the example of that with the Eagles. When they had a really good offensive line, Saquon was able to take a really good offense to a great offense with his explosive ability. So that applies here, right? That's one side of it. The other side of it's what you called out, which is like the surplus value argument. And sometimes I see people distort this, and they say, when you have these elite prospects, it's different, right? Which is somewhat true. Like, I do think Jeremiah Love is like awesome. Like, I've been a huge fan of him for like 2 to 3 years now in college. Like, I thought that, last year he was the best running back in college football.
I think Notre Dame's really going to miss him this year.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie.
They're still going to be good, but
yeah. Sorry. No, you're good. I kind of thought he was better than Genty last year, but Genty's numbers were overwhelming, obviously. But even with these elite guys, like you said, the argument would be, okay, well, you got to pay him like the 7th best running back, but I'm pretty confident he's going to be like the 3rd best running back. And I would say, you're probably right. He probably is going to be the 3rd best running back. But let's read off the list of names now that you are paying similarly to Jeremiah Love. The names around him are Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Alvin Kamara, Josh Jacobs, and Travis Etienne, previously Etienne.
Yeah.
Those are the guys that he has now slotted into. You're basically paying him like high-end RB2 money, right? It's not Saquon, it's not McCaffrey, it's not Derrick Henry, but it's right below that. Let's consider Carnell Tate, who was drafted right after Jeremiah Love. The wide receivers Carnell Tate is next to are Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, Khalil Shakir, Dontavian Wicks, Rashad Bateman. So you're either talking about guys that are like okay wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s that are young and like hoping that they enter their prime, or you're talking about guys that are now past their prime, who are on the last deal that they will play on. Mm-hmm. So what do I think is more likely? That Carnell Tate is better than Khalil Shakir, or that Jeremiah Love is better than Josh Jacobs, right? Like, we're just comparing different things here. And the surplus value thing really does matter, because you know where you can't find offensive linemen is in free agency. They just don't get there. And so this is not just a one-for-one, we'll draft the running back third, but then we'll spend bigger money on the tackle. No, like, they just don't make it to free agency. So you're forgoing your one opportunity, or one of your very few opportunities, to draft an elite defensive lineman, offensive lineman, maybe even throw a wide receiver in there, although it's probably a little easier to trade for those guys. To me, there's just no argument for this. I had written an award for this too, which was like, is the owner making the picks award? Because the only benefit to me this has for their franchise is, hey, like, this is the biggest name, right? Or this is the biggest star that will bring some notoriety and some fun to our fan base. Although I would ask, did Raiders fans have fun watching Ashton Genty in his first year? I don't think the answer is yes. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and I think you could say the same thing for that award with Carson Beck. It's like, okay, he's the biggest name. He was the one that was talked about as the potential first pick a couple of years ago. And like, he's the guy that made all the money in Miami and was dating whoever, and you know, he's always just had like the big stories around him. And it's like, he's here in the third round, so we're going to take him. I think there were better prospects. I think this is the team that, you know, we're going to talk a little bit more potentially. Actually, we might not get to it because I have Chiefs, but I have them for something else. But this is the team that I would have loved to see Nussmeier with.
Yeah.
Because I think when you get him in like this type of potential offensive system with some of the receiving weapons that they have, like, I think that could have been really fun. And I think he would have been much better than Carson Beck with those guys.
Yeah, some more Simpson or discussion here to Simpson. Like, I just had a grade on Beck that is not even close to where he was selected. I had a 6th round grade on Beck, and he goes early 3rd. So obviously, from one perspective, I'm going to hate it immediately. But on top of that, why are you taking the backup type? Like, what does this accomplish? You already have Jacoby Brissett. You don't need a boring backup. You need a starting quarterback. And so to me, it's like, if you're going to take a guy here, then just take Drew Aller. Like,
I was about to say the same thing. Like, Drew Aller went right after this, and I would have liked that pick better here because, to your point, he has the tools to at least develop into a good starter.
And you're probably, odds are, no matter who you draft, you're going to have this first, second pick next year, and you're going to take Manning, or you're going to take whichever other quarterback pops this year, whether it's Sellers, Dante Moore, name your other list of guys. It's a deep class this year. Like, there's odds are whoever you drafted this year wasn't going to be it anyways, but at least try to find a starter. Like, I don't know, drafting Beck to me just feels like, hey, let's get a name out there that people know and might get excited about, but we really know, like, this is never going anywhere. So yeah, I hate this draft. I just think this is the exact opposite approach that a rebuilding team should take. These are the years where you should just be stacking talent at premium positions. And I think you even kind of see that in like their 2nd and 4th round picks. They come back, they take a guard, they take a high upside defensive tackle. Like, they kind of, like, you can see through their other picks, they understood that these were priorities, but they just didn't place those priorities high enough over some of the other, like, flashier selections that they made.
Yeah.
All right. That one was yours, right? So it's my turn?
Yes. Yeah, it's your turn now.
All right. Let's move next to another 2-team one, and I'll move faster on this one. This one is my award titled, Sometimes It's Better to Be Lucky Than Good. And there's a couple teams I want to hit on here. The first one is the New York Giants, who I think, by no doing of their own, somehow came away with Arvell Reese at number 5. Yeah. I won't spend too much time on this. I think Reese is a really awesome player. He would have been the guy that I would have wanted outside of Mendoza this year. So to get him at 5 feels like a huge win. They come back and they're able to get an offensive tackle at 10 in Maui Noah, who, you know, I think is a reasonable pick. I didn't think he belonged in like top 5 discussions, but to be able to get an edge the top 5 and an offensive tackle in the top 10 that you feel pretty good about, to me is a big win. And with Tyson off the board, who was clearly kind of, I think, the guy they had telegraphed that they were going to take at 10, that's about as good as you're going to end up with. I think some of their later round picks are solid, like Colton Hood. You got him. There was some speculation about him going first round. He falls to you at 37. You get Malachi Fields in the third round. Another pretty solid pick there on a wide receiver that people are excited about. I think overall, they didn't do anything crazy here. No crazy moves, but they let the board fall to them. And they drafted guys that I think are pretty talented players. And for a rebuilding team, you got to be excited about getting this much talent in the building.
Yeah, I really liked especially their earlier picks here. Like, to your point, I think that they kind of got lucky with Reese falling to them at 5, and I thought that was a really good pick for them. Maui Noah similarly is I kind of agreed that I'll say I don't think that I would have taken him top 5, but coming back to the Cardinals, there was some talk about them taking him at 3. I would have preferred that. So getting him at 10 here, I think is totally fine. It is a good pick. Colton Hood was a good pick in the second round. So yeah, just a team that I think just kind of hit singles and doubles. They just did exactly what they needed to do at each of these picks.
All right, other team I have in this category is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this one was a funny story on draft night. So they were on the phone with Mekhi Lemon, basically telling him, we're taking you at 21, assuming there's no way the Cowboys were going to take him. The Cowboys get on the phone with the Eagles, and they say, hey, you want to come move up to 20? And the Eagles are like, sure. And they take Mekhi Lemon. So Pittsburgh goes from, literally being on the phone with Mekhi Lemon telling him, we're taking you, to, who are we going to pick at 21 now? But what I will say is, I think they might have been better off for this happening. Because not only do they get Max Iheanacho, the high upside offensive tackle out of Arizona State, who I think is a really interesting prospect and a really fun guy to add to your offensive line room, but they come back and they get Jeremy Bernard in the second round. Is I don't know. Lemon's a better player than Bernard, but is there that big of a gap between those two guys? I think I'd certainly rather have the high upside offensive tackle in the first round and come back around and still be able to pick up my steady number 2 type of receiver in the second round. I think they did overdraft Aller, even though I think he's a fun long-term bet. I think he belonged more so in the 5th round. We'll talk more about the quarterbacks on our quarterbacks episode later once we kind of get fully settled there and have rankings fully wrapped. I think some of the quarterback decisions were just baffling in this draft overall. But overall, I think the top of the draft maybe didn't go how they intended it to, but may have worked out better than what they were planning for.
Yeah, and I think this quarterback thing kind of stems from it being a weaker quarterback class and a weaker class overall. But I actually really like the Steelers draft. Iheanacho, however you say it. I know we've said a couple different things. And I'm still not really clear on how you say his name, but I think that this is the kind of tackle you take shots on in the first round. I really hope he's still kind of learning how to play football. He was a basketball player until just a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, however many it was. So he's still learning the position, and you see the physical upside with him. So he's a guy that could turn into a really, really good tackle in the NFL. You've kind of made some other investments in that offensive line. And then I also think Jennings Dunker in third round is he has potential as a starter on that offensive line too. So I actually really like the way that's shaping up long term. And it could be a position where when you find the quarterback, if it's not Drew Aller developing into it, which personally I don't think that's going to happen, but when you find the quarterback and put him in that position, he's got a lot of the pieces already built out in front of him. He's got the line to protect him. He's got some receiving threats. I love Jeremy Bernard. He was Alabama's most consistent player this year. He was the guy that kind of bailed us out all year long. I think this is a really good landing spot for him too. I think he's going to be locked in wide receiver 2 for a long time. He was never a guy that had the elite upside of a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, but he was one that I was pretty confident was just always going to be a really stable presence in an offense in the NFL. So love that pick for them. Love a couple of the later swings with Nowakowski and Heidenreich and like just a lot of different players that could play roles for them. Um, yeah, I really liked this draft overall. And to your point, I think they ended up being better off in the first and second round than if they just picked Makai Lemon at 21.
One final note on them that is less positive, and I do think I understand why they went Aller here. I just think it's too rich. I will say, like, maybe consider that you don't have to draft a quarterback from the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
it's like,
I thought it as soon as they picked him. I was like, what?
Of course.
They have an obsession with it.
Of course they're going to draft the local guy. Like, maybe it'll work. I don't know, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it does kind of fit the like archetype of like the big, really strong quarterback that like you think you need in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, this makes way more sense to me than Pickett, at least. Like, I can at least be like, you can sell me on a few years down the road, like, hey, Aller's a decent starter, and he fits the AFC North style. And
you're not spending a first-round pick on him.
Yeah, exactly.
But
all right, let's move into your next award.
All right, I'm going to call this the worst trade, but still a decent draft, and I'm going to give it to the Chiefs. I did not like the trade up to 6. They went from 9 to 6. They gave up 74 and 148 to do it. They got nothing back. The Browns moved down from 6 to 9. I think both of the players that were picked, would have been picked if the team stuck with their original spots. The Browns probably would have still picked Fano at 6. The Chiefs probably, and there's no guarantee, maybe they had intel that we don't, but they probably still would have had Mansour Delane at 9. I think that they just gave up draft capital for no reason. And I don't like doing that, especially when you're giving up 74, which is like a pretty high pick in the 3rd round. Like that's a valuable pick. You're still expecting to find starters at that point. So I just don't like that process overall. Like giving up picks where you're expecting to find starters to get a guy that you probably could have just gotten at 9 anyway. Overall, I still kind of like some of the guys that they got in this draft. I feel like Peter Woods, he's still kind of a wild card with like what he might turn into. Didn't really develop much at Clemson, especially later in his career there. Supposedly some like personal life stuff went on that might have been affecting some of that in the last year. I think he probably will still end up being a good player, good in the rotation. R. Mason Thomas, again, like they just kind of collect different body types. I think R. Mason Thomas is like a good, solid player. Doesn't have some of the elite upside, but like will probably be a good contributor for them. I love that that someone picked Nussmeier. I hated that, and we'll talk.
We'll get there.
Quarterback, but yeah. Overall, still I thought was like solid draft. Maybe a little underwhelming, just considering you gave up a 3rd round pick that like it could have been somebody. There's like a chasm in this class after R. Mason Thomas where that pick was. So
yeah. I completely agree with you that I don't think Washington or New Orleans would change their pick if Delane had been on the board for them. My only question is, I know, like, and this is where we get into, like, we just don't know the intel for sure. I do wonder if Dallas liked Delane, and I wonder if that's the other player they were interested in outside of Caleb Downs, and if they would have been willing to trade up to 8 or 7, to get ahead of the Chiefs. If they had intel there, I would understand it. Now, there's still a question at that point of, like, is the value worth it, right? Like, are you better off, kind of what we talked about earlier with the winner's curse, like, are you better off just sitting at 9 and taking your second favorite prospect on the board?
And if they took Delane, maybe you're like, okay, we don't get the corner, but we get Caleb Downs, so we get the other.
And if you've got those guys stacked pretty similarly, then maybe you're fine with that, right? Like, I think there's still an argument that sitting at 9 is the right decision, but it's hard for us to know for sure, like, on the intel side, who else may have been trying to move up to 7 or 8. Okay. I am up next here. Let's hit on a team that I don't think I had a great name for this one, but this is a draft that I enjoyed because this team took some shots. This is the Carolina Panthers. I think they took a lot of guys in early rounds that have high upside but are a little less certain. But I think for a team in the Panthers position, like this makes sense. Like you're not at a point where you're thinking about contention anytime soon. So let's continue to try to bring high upside guys in the building. Monroe Freeling at 19, I think was good value. Get a high upside guy that can maybe play like a true left tackle.
Love that pick.
Lee Hunter is a really productive and explosive defensive lineman that plays on the interior. Got him in the second round. I think Brazel's interesting, man. I don't know, like I'm willing to see him out, especially in the third round. Like I think second might have been a little early for him, but they drafted him mid third round. I think he's got enough tools where like I don't have any problems with this, man. Like this guy's really explosive. I do think he's way better at the catch point than some of the other Tennessee receivers that had this type of speed. I think Will Lee is an interesting pick. It's kind of like a bigger corner. And then they also pick up a center who fell, I think, further than people expected, Sam Hecht, in the fifth round, as a guy that, like, I like how they were able to get some high upside guys early and still swing back around and, get some stable productivity later in the draft. Nothing crazy here, but this was one I sneaky liked and could see. They only need a couple of these guys to hit for this to be a really fun draft.
Yeah, and they're really close to having a good team, and they're only going to be held back by like how good can Bryce Young be with what you put around him. But this could be one of those drafts that kind of pushes it over the edge to like this is like an 11-12 win team for the next few years. If some of these break right, I think Monroe Freeling, I love that pick for them. I think that he was one of the better tackle prospects in the class, and like getting him at 19 is awesome to put around your offense. I agree with you about Brazel. Like, there are some like character concerns, supposedly. I'm willing to take the shot on it here in the third round because I think he could end up being one of the better receivers. If like that doesn't affect his on-field play, that could be he could be one of the better receivers in this class in a couple of years. And it's really weird. I forget who posted it the other day, but have you seen the size of the Panthers receiving room? Like the shortest guy is like 6'3".
That's crazy. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Brazel kind of fits that mold of like he's really tall and physical, even though he does have a lot of speed to burn. So, yeah, I liked this class. I thought like it wasn't one of my favorites, but I thought it was like really good, and it was in like that next tier for me.
Yeah, and I think I remember Nate Tice talking about. You mentioned the receiver room that made me think of it. Like I think I remember listening to him talk about the idea of like, Brazel also gives you the opportunity to play McMillan in different spots, right? Like McMillan played on the outside a ton this past year. Now maybe you can use him, almost like how the Falcons use Drake London, where sometimes he's on the outside, sometimes he's playing in the slot, and like get him better matchups. I think Brazel, like having that true downfield burner receiver does allow you to kind of use your best guy in different ways. So I think that'll be interesting to see how they do that. All right. What's your next one?
All right, I'm going to call this one They Did It Again, and in parentheses, positive. But this this award I'm giving to the Browns. I thought this is the second year in a row where I just really liked what they did. Like,
with no dumb quarterback stuff this time. Just like really solid.
Yeah. Like, because if you removed like the Shadur and Dylan Gabriel stuff from last year, they had a good draft. Like they just were really smart with what they did. And this year, I feel like you feel the same way about this class overall. They traded down a second year in a row, and picked up extra picks, and then use those to like get some other guys that could be really good contributors for their team. I love Fano at 9. I think he's one of the better tackle prospects in the class. They desperately needed offensive line. They signed a few guys in free agency, but they still had like huge needs on the offensive line. And you see like they hit it 3 times. They went with Fano in the first round, Austin Barber in the third round, and Parker Brailsford in the 5th round. And I think like potentially all 3 of those guys could be starting within the next couple of years, just given the state of their offensive line. So I love that for sure. Casey Concepcion, if he figures out the ball skills, could be one of the wide receiver 1 prospects from this class. Like he has some high upside, and then they come back and double up with Denzel Boston, who a lot of people thought was going to be first round prospect, at the top of the second round. So I love that too. Like you get two legitimate shots at good receivers in a receiver room that kind of lacked that like dominant presence. You get another guy in Emmanuel McNeil Warren at 26 in the second round, who was also talked about as a first round prospect. Um, and then just some of the depth guys, like Parker Brailsford was like one of the better players for Alabama the last couple of years. He's smaller, which I think affected his draft stock a lot, but like he was always a really solid center. So like I think there's a chance he could actually be pretty good in the NFL. He'll always be a little bit limited by some of the size stuff, but like I think he'll be probably a solid starter. And then Justin Jefferson was another that in my mind I was like, okay, he's going to be a later prospect. I thought he would go after Deontay Lawson for Alabama, but Justin Jefferson showed a lot as an off-ball linebacker in coverage and the ability to like play sideline to sideline. That like there might also be something there for him to like contribute to a linebacker room. They take a couple tight ends. They take Taylon Green, who's like the really toolsy, but maybe not as refined quarterback from Arkansas in the 6th round, which I like that swing a lot more than some of the ones that went in like the 3rd and 4th round. That we'll talk about one in just a minute. But yeah, I just thought that like there wasn't a lot of wasted. There wasn't really anything wasted in this class. Like each round felt really intentional. Each pick felt really intentional. Like this guy has a real shot to contribute to our team immediately and in the future.
Yeah, there's one thing I'm noticing more and more in like some of these classes that you feel like are really good draft classes. I think the Dolphins was another one that was like this in some ways, where some of these prospects that are a little bit more scheme dependent. A guy with the Dolphins that was like this was Kyle Lewis, the linebacker out of Pittsburgh in the 4th round, who is almost like a linebacker, safety, nickel hybrid. Like he's much smaller, but is an awesome player. Those guys naturally are just going to fall because there's a lot of teams that are just like, we can't use this player correctly, so he's just not valuable for us. McNeil Warren is a more traditional deep safety. There's some teams that just don't really look for this type of player anymore. There's less teams that need this type of guy now. So he falls all the way to 58. But to me, they drafted 3 guys in Concepcion, Boston, and McNeil Warren that if you had said, hey, we took this guy at 24, I would have said, like, cool, makes complete sense. Yeah. Like, I understand why you took this guy. And you got all 3 of them, and you didn't have to move up for any of them. You just sat and picked Concepcion, Boston, McNeil Warren back to back to back. Like, that's about as good as you can do in the first couple rounds. They go offensive line early. Like, I think the draft set up really well for them because the run on offensive line didn't start before their pick, and then the run on wide receivers didn't end before their later picks. So, like, things fell really well for them in this draft.
Definitely.
The Austin Barber pick, I think, makes complete sense. I never felt like he was a super high upside guy in college, but, like, 3rd round pick is about what I think is fair for him. I remember watching Cassius Howell just bully him when they played Texas A&M. Like, he was so fast. Like, Barber had no shot. But in most games, Barber was a pretty good tackle, and so I think 3rd round is fair for him. Struggles with some of those like faster, more explosive edge rushers. And then, Taylon Green, like, he's better than the other guys that got taken in the 3rd and 4th round. Like, I had a better grade on him than...
Like, unique skill sets, like he's really tall, really big arm, 4.36, like... Sure, take a shot on that guy in the 6th round.
Yeah, I mean, I had a better grade on him than Beck. I had a better grade on him than Klubnik. Like, I'm fine with this, especially for a team that doesn't have a long-term solution at this point. Yeah, like, see what you got. If not, you already, the Browns are familiar with Terrell Pryor. Like, they know how to take a quarterback and play him at wide receiver and get 1,000 yards out of him. Like, they can figure it out. So, yeah, I love this draft. I think this is probably my favorite draft of any team this year. Just super complete class. The board fell extremely well for them, and I think they took high upside shots where it made sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. This overall was my favorite class. There's another one we're going to talk about I liked a lot, but for different reasons, and I had some other like questions that kind of separated this one and made it a little bit better. All
right, I am up. Let me hit on one. This may be who you were talking about. It may not be, but I think it's another one that's one of my favorite classes. This one to me is like the award is like they got the perfect script. Like if they were going through before the draft and they said, oh, it would be great if this player is available at this pick and this player is available in the second round and etc. That to me is how this draft fell for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who get Ruben Bain at 15. Like, I mean, good job. You picked Ruben Bain. Like, congrats. Like, I don't, it's not like I think the front office did some miracle here by drafting a really good player.
ESPN Auto Draft could have done that too.
Yeah. But you got to be really excited if you're a Bucs fan, because Bain, I think, did fall because of some of the natural arm length concerns that people had, but he's still, I think, a good enough player where he's clearly worthy of being picked where they took him. They come back and take Josiah Trotter at linebacker in the second round. In the third round, they get Ted Hurst, who I think kind of perfectly fits in as like the potential Mike Evans replacement for that offense. Obviously nowhere near the player that Mike Evans is, but like a guy that can play that type of role. And then in the fourth round, they come back and get Keontae Scott, who is another example of this type of player that I'm talking about in the mid-rounds, where most teams can't do something with this guy, but he could be really good in certain roles. And, I mean, man, you want to find a team that needs a blitzing slot? Like, I mean, Todd Bowles will send this guy blitzing on 50% of his snaps. Like, he's going to be basically playing edge rusher for the Bucs. So I think he made a lot of sense. Overall, like, guys fell to them where it made sense, and they were able to get guys, I think, that fit well in, maybe some of the holes that they had in their team, and especially like Ted Hurst and Keontae Scott there. So, yeah, only 7 picks that they made. It wasn't like they had some overwhelming number of selections in this class, but I think they've got to be pretty happy with how the board fell and who they came away with.
Yeah, this was not the team I was talking about, but they were in one of my, like, I had them in my top 5 favorite drafts for sure, because I love the Bain pick. To your point, you don't give them too much credit for it, because like I think a lot of teams would have done it at this point if they were in the Bucs position. The Bucs like desperately needed pass rush help, and in our mock draft before the draft, we I think I gave them Keldrick Falk.
Yeah,
who, like, I still would have liked that pick for them. It was early for him, obviously, because he goes at the end of the first round. But, like, that is the kind of player that they kind of needed, who has, like, a chance to develop into a high-end pass rusher. Bain already is that. Like, he doesn't have the freaky tools, like the bigger size that a Keldrick Falk does. But, like, you talk about a natural pass rusher and really, really polished already. I think Bain is going to end up being really good and look like a steal at 15. And I think it's kind of one of the this is one of the picks that like the Eagles would make sometimes. Where it's like, how did he fall that far? Like, why did he make it down that far, and then we just let them take him, a guy that is at a position of need and is going to come in and immediately be good.
Yeah.
Like, I really think Bain is going to be that way for them.
Yeah, and this time the reason's obvious, right? But it could still work out really well for the Bucs. All right, what's your next one?
All right. Yeah, I'll go with my most intriguing award, and this was the one that I was talking about. This is the Jets. I like a lot of the things that they did, and I'm kind of intrigued at how it plays out, but I think there are a couple of more questions than there were like the Browns. But
I agree.
Overall, at 2, I actually really liked David Bailey at 2. I understood him or Arvell Reese, so like, they felt like Bailey's a better player. That's fine. I didn't watch Bailey. To your point, like, we mostly watched the quarterbacks, but I saw him when we were watching Jalen Daniels, and like, that guy was in the backfield every single play.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he actually started on side the entire game. But yeah, I think Bailey's good at 2. Then you talk about getting Sadiq at 16 and then Omar Cooper at 30. I think Omar Cooper Jr. is probably the safer of those players. I feel like he's going to be a good receiver. Kenyon Sadiq is a little more interesting because you have to – tight ends usually take some time to develop. Sadiq is a specific type of tight end, too, where he is a lot more of the receiving threat. So, like, you kind of have to be intentional with how you're going to play him. That one may end up not working out for them, but I fully understand taking that upside in the first round, especially when you have 2 other picks that you feel pretty confident about. So, it looks a lot better in retrospect because they were able to get Omar Cooper Jr. at 30, where if he's not there at 30 and you have to take a different receiver who's a little riskier, I like it a little bit less, but it did work out for them in this case. Then you talk about D'Angelo Pons in the second round. He's another, like, he's a second round player just because of his size, but you watch that guy play, and his size doesn't end up really mattering because he plays a lot more physical than his size indicates. And then I think several of the other players will potentially contribute. Cade Klubnik in the fourth is another of the questions that I'm like, I don't know that I would have taken that quarterback, but this is where you stack this up against the Cardinals. The Jets had a lot of picks early on, so they took a lot more swings at these high upside guys. The Cardinals didn't have that, and they took the position that contributes the least to an offense and a team's success in running back, where like you need a lot around them to really make that position valuable. The Jets took like some higher upside plays here at edge, at receiver, at corner, and then they take the quarterback swing where like the Cardinals took Carson Beck at the top of the third round. The Jets don't take the quarterback swing until their second fourth round pick. It was 10th pick in the fourth round. I don't love it, but it's at least understandable because it's on day 3. So like, it's a little bit of a question mark for me, but I can't fault it like as much as I can with the Carson Beck pick. So overall, I like the Jets draft a lot just because, you know, they stockpiled these picks and they're using them on potential high upside players.
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about this draft. I think, like you talked about, Bailey's a really impressive prospect. I would have preferred Reese, but I'm not going to kill him for it. I think it is a reasonable pick at number 2. You mentioned the Klubnik thing. I think this was the most surprising guy that got picked in like the third and fourth round. Like there was a lot of noise around Beck, and I did anticipate like somebody's probably going to take this guy and before round 6 or whatever, just because he's, you know, there was a lot of noise around him. He's the more prototypical guy. Even Aller is like, okay, somebody can talk themselves into the upside here. I don't know. Klubnik, I did not expect to go as early just because I didn't see him as a guy with as much upside as some of the other quarterbacks in this draft. But they take him in the fourth round, like you said. Not like some ridiculous selection, but one that I wasn't a fan of. If they did not draft D'Angelo Pons, I would be much more likely to be negative about this class, but I just like him so much that I have a hard time hating on the class. I will say I could see the Sadiq thing just being a like total failure because
I think that's a very possible outcome for it.
And this is more fit dependent than it is about Sadiq the player. So I'm not taking anything away from Sadiq. Like I think he's a really good player, but you already have another tight end that you like and was pretty good. His rookie, like Mason Taylor, I didn't think there were major concerns about him coming into this offseason. He was a
second rounder last year. So
so like you kind of filled this need earlier. I also Frank Reich, an offensive coordinator, like am I supposed to get excited about that for some reason? Like do I really trust him to use both these tight ends well? Like you said, I think they at least read the board well, understanding that they didn't need to take Cooper Jr. at 16, because I think some people mocked Cooper Jr. to them at 16, and they end up coming back around and getting him at 30. So I at least think they played the board well in that regard, and like getting Sadiq early and waiting on Cooper made more sense. But yeah, the Sadiq one specifically scares me given the team fit, and I do think like there's a chance they look back and regret not taking Arvell Reese. So yeah, I have very mixed feelings about this class because I love D'Angelo Pons. I think Cooper Jr. makes sense. Some of the other picks I could see, they have, like you said, they've got legit upside, but I think there's a world where we look back and say, man, for having 4 picks in the first 2 rounds, 3 picks in the first round, like did you really come away with enough value to extract from these picks?
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
All right. I am up here. I will go with my last team-specific award. This one gets into another broader discussion about draft discourse and value and all those sorts of things, and that is the Jacksonville Jaguars. I am not even going to talk about the players they drafted because I really don't think that's what this is about. Yeah. The Jags, just to summarize their draft, because I'm not sure like anyone listening to this is going to have any idea who a single one of these players are. The Jags basically drafted like the most obscure, like off the board players that you could really ever draft. And they drafted multiple guys that were like outside of the top 600 on consensus boards, which we'll get into the consensus board thing. But they've got their own method. They do not subscribe to groupthink. They identify the players that they like, and they go out and they take them. And I think that's really what I want to talk about here. And like the award I had is like, this is the draft that like feeds the Twitter discourse. Like, who knows if it's going to work or not? Like, it may work, it may not. There's players on the draft on NFL.com that don't even have a picture on them because they were like the 650th ranked prospect. So why would the NFL.com need to get their picture ready for the draft tracker? But I think this gets to an idea that people were talking about with the 49ers, that people were talking about with the Jaguars, on is it a fair way to evaluate the draft to look at a team and say, how closely did you pick to consensus? And if you are deviating from consensus, is that inherently a bad thing? So I'll give a couple thoughts and then I'll throw it over to you to see what you have. To me, what I think about here, and I think what the data shows, is when you vastly deviate from consensus in the first few rounds, and by consensus, like there are websites that will basically aggregate as many public rankings as they can into like a full consensus board. So it's basically a way to say, instead of looking at one person's rankings, we'll look at 50 people's rankings and basically like average those into one quote unquote consensus board. That generally the data shows in the first 3 rounds or so that if you strongly deviate from consensus, on average, you will pay for that. You will fail more often than you will not. In later rounds, it seems to be not as much the case. And part of that is because the guys that drop to later rounds and are high on consensus boards are often the guys that have character issues that nobody in the public knows about. And so then they're like, they don't get drafted. And it's like, well, why didn't they get drafted? Oh, it's like, there was a defensive tackle out of Ole Miss that was like the top available player on ESPN's draft tracker for like the last 4 rounds of the draft. And it's like, oh, well, he has like major off the field issues. Like, duh. No wonder teams didn't draft him, but people ranked him higher, right? So like, there's what the reason I highlight that is to say, I do think that just blindly looking at consensus boards is a poor way to evaluate the draft. And I think it's unfair to teams who have done more due diligence on these players to say that the guy who's watching 600 people and trying to put them in a ranking is going to know these players in as much detail as the teams who are scouting a more specific subset of players in more detail. What I will say is teams like the 49ers, teams like the Jags, generally speaking, when you reach really far in the first 2 to 3 rounds of the draft, most of the time you are wrong. Most of the time the data shows that long-term this does not work out. So I'm really curious to see how this works out for the Jaguars, because I don't think this is like a death sentence. I don't think this is immediately like you deserve to be fired for this. But what is true in these scenarios is the more you deviate from consensus, if it does not work, there is a clear thing to point at and say, well, I know why you messed up, right? I may not be able to explain why the other GMs got it wrong or why they should be fired, but I can point to a specific thing with you and tell you why you should be fired. So it's a bold move. I'm very curious to see how it works out for them. And yeah, curious to hear if you have any additional thoughts on the whole consensus board discourse.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting discussion, and to me, the Jags, like, is this class just a rage bait? Are they trying to like we're smarter than everybody and we want you to all get mad about it? Like, I do think there's a certain type of arrogance in this class. In these types of classes, you can call it confidence. I think you definitely have to be confident in your evals to draft like this. I think it does come off as arrogance. I think that, obviously NFL teams, they have a lot more intel than anyone in the public ever will. So I think that there is something real to that like the consensus board will be wrong about these players that we just don't have all the info about. But to your point, generally, especially in early rounds, it can tell you like you should not reach this far for a player because the chances are you are going to be wrong and he's not going to work out as a hit for your team. And I think that blatantly ignoring that is, again, arrogant in your own evals. And I think it's not helpful. Like if I want to give myself and my team the best chance of success, I need to use everything at my disposal. And if the data says that like the consensus board is a a point that I can use to say like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be reaching this far for a player, then I should use that. That like
Yeah,
that
and
is
some teams are.
yes, yeah. And and I think that's the other part of this is okay, even if the NFL boards are stacked a little bit differently than the consensus board that we have available for the public, teams don't know each other's boards, whatever. But generally, they probably fall like somewhere in the same place with the other NFL teams. Reaching this far is also just giving up value. If you're like, okay, we know this guy's not going to go until later, but we love him and we think he's worth this pick, so we're going to take him right now. Well, why not trade down and get him later? Like, you're just throwing away value. That is not smart. And if you think like, okay, we can trade down and get him later, pick up another pick or two on day 3. Give yourself another couple of swings with your guys that you were like really confident in this eval. That's the part of this that I think even if you really don't agree with the consensus boards and like that part of it, you should see this as an advantage. Like we think our evals are better. We're going to trade down and get our guys later than everybody else thinks they're worth because we know they're going to be better, and we're going to get more of them because we've traded down out of some of these higher picks. That's really where I fall on it. Like personally, I would not draft this way, but if you're going to, like, get more value out of it.
Well, and to your point, like I think you say like, okay, in that situation, how do you use the consensus board? Well, generally, that is probably your best tool, barring specific players with specific concerns or specific intel that you have. That's your best high-level tool of where you expect players to go, right? Because you, like you said, you don't know where the other teams have set their boards up at. You might have an specific intel on, oh, I know they really like this one player, but you're not going to have that high-level insight. And so I do think having that big picture view helps you get to a better strategic approach for the draft and hopefully allows you to maximize value, like you said. So, yeah, I do think consensus boards have value. I will say, like, to me, I think that NFL Draft Twitter does sometimes get too close to groupthink. And then you go back and you look at the order of the draft, like from 5 years ago, and you're like, oh, yeah, like Micah Parsons went 11th. Like, and nobody at the time was like, oh, he should be going 2, right? Like, that happens. And so I think, like, I try to avoid just like coming out and saying like, oh, this is definitely going to happen, right? Or like, this person's deviating from consensus, so they're clearly wrong. But I do think the consensus board provides a tool to say, can I justify why I'm so far off, right? Like, that's how I look at it when I'm watching quarterbacks is like, if I watch a guy and I'm way off from what public consensus is, like, I'm going to take a little bit more time to think about that and be like, okay, why? Like, can I actually explain why I think differently than everybody else? And if I can, then great. Like, I'll bet on that and see if I'm right in a couple years. But if you can't, then that's a really good opportunity to take a step back and rethink, like, okay, what was I missing? Or how does this player fit with my specific scheme if you're an NFL team that maybe the consensus board does not fully capture, right? Like, those are reasonable differences that you might have. So, okay. Let's go ahead and move into your next award. I think you've got 2 left.
All right. Yeah, sorry, I froze there for a second, but I came in right as you were calling me for that. So, yeah, I'll go with the most. I think it was kind of the most boring draft, at least to me. I'm gonna go with the Colts here. Obviously, you kind of hate it for them. They don't have the first round pick, and then Daniel Jones gets hurt during the season, so not how they wanted their year to go. But you just kind of look through their draft, and it's fine. I mean, I can't really fault them for taking a lot of like, they took a couple edge players, they took a couple linebackers, an offensive lineman in the mid rounds. They've hit on several of those the last few years, so like maybe there's something there. AJ Halsey, 3rd round, might be a pretty good player. But, like, overall, I don't know really what you're getting excited about from this class. I actually think Deion Burks is kind of interesting in the 7th round. So, like, that potentially is something. But, like, overall, this was just kind of fine. It was like a C draft. Like
Yeah,
not
this
not not good, not bad.
this might be our biggest disagreement. I don't know. I don't know if I'd say I like love this draft. I definitely like this draft. I do think like my award that I had listed before I like handed it to you was most consistent
Yeah.
draft. I just think like they didn't have a first round pick from rounds 2 through 7. Every single guy they took, I'm like, yeah, I could see this guy contributing for them. Like I think they have one of the best like rounds 4 through 7 of anybody. I think Jalen Farmer's a really interesting guard prospect. I wish Florida had not lost him in the portal because we certainly could have used him. But like had been familiar with him when he played at Florida for a couple years. George Gumbs, another guy from Florida who was a converted wide receiver from like Northern Illinois, who they converted to edge rusher and had converted and then transferred to Florida and developed a lot more, way more of like a pure like pass rush guy. Like he's too small to do anything in the run game, but like for a 5th round pick, he might actually be able to contribute. They get another edge after that in Caden Curry, and I think like their 7th round picks are about as good as you can do. Like in this draft, I think it made a lot of sense to wait on running back until the 7th round. So you pick up Seth McGowan, who like somebody else could argue this is like the 4th best running back in the draft, and I'd be like, sure, like there's 10 guys that could be the 4th best running back in this draft. So like I'm not going to argue with you. So to get him in the 7th round, and then I think Deion Burks is a steal this late. He's very undersized. I understand why the NFL didn't love him, but I do think you can explain away a lot of his production issues and his analytic concerns based on the situation he had to play in at Oklahoma this year that was just not constructed whatsoever to generate wide receiver production. Even Mateer, when he was good, was more so creating out of structure, scrambling, all that stuff. It was not set up for Deion Burks to succeed, and his Purdue success is much more indicative, I think, of the quality of player he is. So I really like the depth that they got in this draft. I think where they drafted C.J. Allen in the 2nd round, like at the 53rd pick, I'm a lot more comfortable with that than I was when he was getting talked about as a 1st round prospect. So, yeah, I don't know that they'll have anybody from this draft that's like a star, but I do think that like I think they might have drafted like 8 guys that could be legitimate NFL players, and there's just not very many teams where I think that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's very fair. And I do really agree with the point about C.J. Allen, where like he was getting a lot of 1st round buzz. I didn't love that, but getting him here in the 2nd round, I think is definitely fine value.
All right, I will hit. Actually, no. Go ahead and hit your last one because mine's a little different, so we can end on that one.
Okay. I'm I'm gonna go with I guess this would have been your version of like I called it the Moneyball he gets on base award. Like all of these picks, I just thought were solid, and I'm gonna give it to the Texans. I especially with their first few picks, I really liked what they did. They get Keelan Rutledge, 1st round, 26th, probably a plug and play, like really good guard, like really solid guard. They are another team that just really needed offensive line help, and I think that this is immediately going to help them out. Then you talk about 2nd round with Caden McDonald. Uh, he was another that I I think he was the only one that I'd for Ben Solak's like predict the 1st round. He was the only one that I predicted would go 1st round that did not, and he goes 2nd round, 4th pick. So, but he was also invited to the green room. He was there for the draft the first night, didn't get picked. Roger Goodell asked him to stay for the second night, expecting him to go off the board pretty quick. Really glad he did. And I think is going to really help that defense, like kind of free up a lot of things for a lot of the other pieces that they have around. So like that defense got even scarier
Yeah.
with him anchoring in the middle. Marlon Klein in the middle of that run on tight ends, like has, a lot of upside as like one of the tight ends they're going to use in like 12, 13 personnel. Then you talk about some of the day 3 swings. Like you talk about another offensive line prospect who could help you, another linebacker, safety. You get Aiden Fisher there in the 7th round too, who I thought was interesting out of Indiana. So like just over and over, like I think all of these picks make sense with how they're building the team and like what they needed this year. So like when you want to get excited about a draft, you don't typically think like, we brought in a guard and a defensive tackle and a tight end, a blocking tight end at the top of the draft. But for the Texans and for a team that is like really close and just a few pieces away, this is kind of what they needed. And I think could end up being really, really helpful for their team.
Yeah, throwing McDonald into that defense could be scary, man. Like, they are already so good, and they didn't really have that interior defensive line presence. Like, they were just doing that based off having two of the best, 5 to 6 edge rushers in the sport, right? So, like, if you throw a guy in McDonald that actually hits, this could get dangerous for opposing offenses. I'd be really curious to know if they thought he was still going to be there at 36, because I think like coming away with a guard and him was like best case scenario for them in their first 2 picks. Yeah. I would have thought like you would have had to take McDonald at 26 to get him, and then you just take whatever guard is still there at 36. But like they got the 2 guys they were looking for clearly. They got their pick of the offensive guards in Rutledge. Like he was clearly their guy. Some of those other guards went later in that like late first round, early second round range. So worked out really well for them in that regard. And yeah, McDonald's the big headline here for me, and I think could be a major impact for them.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's end with one like individual award, or I guess talking about a couple players here, which was I named this the like someone please draft these guys so I don't feel dumb award for Jermod McCoy and Garrett Nussmeier.
Yeah,
both guys that like I was probably a little like McCoy I was a big fan of. Nussmeier I'm probably a little higher than consensus on, but not like crazy off from like the second, late second, early third range. Like I think that's generally where a lot of people are at with him, but both players I really like, and so was hoping to see them find good landing spots. McCoy, we'll start with McCoy. I won't spend too much time on either of these guys, but I had been making the case for taking McCoy early in the first round. I had said this guy's 24 tape is better than most players in this draft. If he's healthy this year and plays at that level again, he might be a top 5 pick, which I still stand by. And he should be fully recovered from his ACL injury in plenty of time for the NFL season to kick off. What I did not know when I was saying that is that he has another secondary knee injury issue that is serious enough. When I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to pretend to know all the details of this, but like is serious enough where if something were to flare up again and he would need another procedure, it could potentially end his career. We're not just talking about an ACL here. We're talking about like a legitimate career-ending concern. And so this was a really challenging value proposition for teams of how do I value a guy that if he's good could be one of the 5 best players in this draft, but there is a real chance that he never plays a down in the NFL, which is a real possibility depending on how this injury goes for him. He goes to the Raiders at the beginning of the 4th round. To me, this was like a no-brainer at that point. Like teams throw away 4th round picks for kick returners sometimes. Like, yeah, I think we could take a potential all-pro corner at this slot and take the risk that if he
never plays a down.
Yeah, like you got to trust your medical staff on it. If they really think like there's a 75% chance he never plays, then okay, you probably have to think a little differently. But I think this made sense as a risk. I was obviously way wrong on where I thought McCoy would go. Sometimes, when you don't have the intel behind some of the more significant injury stuff, it's easy to miss on those guys. But I really hope he gets healthy because I think he could be an awesome player. I'll stop there on McCoy first, see if you have anything to add before we get to Nussmeier.
Yeah, just that I fully agree. Like, we don't know all of the injury stuff. They find out a lot more about that. They have professionals who are like dedicated to figuring that out and giving them the risk of whether it's going to happen. They have to make calculated decisions based on that risk. I think the risk reward definitely pays off here in the 4th, or at least is worth it. I'll say, like, it may not pay off. He may never play in the NFL. You hate it for him because he probably is going to be a good player if he gets to play, but taking the chance on him, I think, is absolutely worth it in the 4th. So I really love that pick. And I will say, I kind of like the Raiders draft too. Like they got several guys who I think are potential like plug and play players for a team that struggled a lot last year. And you talk about Mike Washington Jr. in the 4th round, who like big and really fast. Sure. Take a shot on it.
All right, let's move to Nussmeier. This one I actually have a harder time explaining, to be honest with you. Like, There was a little bit of injury stuff that came out with him that I'm not surprised would have pushed him down a little bit. So they did find out that he has a cyst on his spine that was pressing on a nerve. This is what was, I think, causing a lot of the like oblique stuff that he was dealing with last year. In some ways, this actually feels a little better to me because it's like, okay, at least we figured out what the problem was, and it sounded like this would be like something that they could remove and would not, like, if it were to bother him again, they could remove it and it would not be like a career altering concern or anything like that. But it did explain why he was having so many of those issues last year. But that to me is not like a 4-round drop from where we thought he would go, which was probably somewhere in the 3rd round. There were also some character things that came out, which I was like shocked to hear about this stuff. Like, he would have been one of the last guys in this draft I would have thought to hear character concerns about, with him being like wearing number 18 at LSU, being a guy that was loyal to the program and set under Jaden Daniels. Like, this is the type of guy you would just think is going to fit like the character mold. Son of an offensive coordinator. All the typical checked boxes would be there. There were some reports that he interviewed poorly with teams and didn't really take accountability for the struggles at LSU, which honestly, I don't think he was responsible for the struggles at LSU. Yeah. So like, it's one of those it's one of those situations where you're like, you're probably right, but like, don't say it in the interview.
Lie in the NFL interview. Like, coaches don't want you to hear that.
Just take accountability for everything, because they would rather you do that than deflect blame, even though he definitely was fair to deflect blame for what happened this year.
Right.
There are times with these guys, and like, I think this should, cause people to take a little bit of a step back and think about what happened with Shedeur last year, where when mid-round quarterback prospects, there are only so many teams that are even thinking about taking a quarterback each year. When those guys have like somewhat relevant concerns, the swing doesn't always just have to be half a round or a round.
Yeah.
There can be like 4-round swings with these guys based on stuff that is not that major, because all of a sudden, once Aller, Beck, Klubnik, Taylon Green, once Cole Payton, once those guys go off the board, there's a lot of teams just don't really have a reason to take a quarterback. And so he falls all the way down to the 7th round. The Chiefs get him. I actually don't hate this as a landing spot for him if he wasn't going to end up somewhere where he was going to have an opportunity to start games. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if he's better than Fields and gets a chance to start early in the season. And so at least he would get a chance to play and maybe get flipped to another organization that really is looking for a quarterback. Like, I don't hate this landing spot for him, but I do think he'll need to hit the ground running, because the clock's going to be ticking on how quickly Mahomes gets back. So a really interesting landing spot for him in the 7th round. I will be curious to see if more reporting comes out on this as we get further away from the draft on what exactly led to this fall.
Yeah, and this is one that, like, you hate to see it happen. And I was thinking, like, the whole time on day 3, like, when is somebody going to take a shot on Nussmeier? We had not heard some of the character concerns at that point in the poor interviews. So, yeah, I hate it for him. I do end up kind of liking the landing spot just from like I will say I'm kind of like mixed feelings just from like, I hate that they already have an established backup in Justin Fields, but I think Nussmeier's probably a better quarterback than Fields.
Yeah, I think calling him an established backup might be generous, to be honest. So
yeah. Well, he's one of those that like he's had shots at starting.
Yeah.
He brings you some like upside as a runner that like you can kind of talk yourself into it as a backup. I hope that Nussmeier takes advantage of preseason and some of the time in camp to like really set himself apart as like he's like an actual quarterback. He can run an offense and can play and like play fairly well, so that maybe he has a shot to get traded to a team. I thought that he would have been great for the Colts.
Yeah.
It would have been a similar situation where it's like, we're waiting on the starter to come back. We're going to take a shot on Nussmeier to come in and compete for that starting job until Daniel Jones is back later in the year. I think Kansas City's probably a better shot for him to like win that job early on. But yeah. And if he doesn't, I think you're right. Like, There are probably some teams probably moved him off their board completely when they heard some of the stuff in the interviews about like why it didn't work at LSU. Because I mean, like, if you're blaming coaches, the next coaches are not going to want to deal with it because they don't want you to blame them when things don't go right. So
especially when you're a backup.
And as the quarterback, like, at the end of the day, it kind of is your job to just take the blame, regardless of how things go. And it is what it is. So, like, it wasn't really that much of his fault. Like, he threw some bad interceptions, okay, but he also made a lot of the best plays for LSU.
Yeah. But with all that being said, Cardinals should have drafted him. Jets should have taken him. Like Steelers, like, I don't.
One of the teams that needed a starter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think you see similar stuff with Pavia. We don't have to talk about this in depth, but I think you see the character concerns. Obviously, he has size concerns as well. He's even smaller than Nussmeier and, like, very limited tools. But, like, the character concerns got Pavia. Like, he was not getting drafted after some of the things that happened. And he told teams, like, he expected to start day one. He didn't want to be a backup. You can't do that when you're a projected day 3 quarterback.
Yep. And we will, so that's a good jumping off point to kind of wrap us up here. So I will have a few more quarterback specific episodes that, like, usually I would try to get out before the draft, but just wasn't able to get to everybody this year. So I'll have a few more of those individual breakdowns coming out, especially focused on the guys who actually did get drafted this year. Those, obviously, I can talk a little bit more about their team fit, but Jon and I will come back at the very end to wrap everything up with one final quarterback recap show where we both go over our boards, like how we ended up ranking all the guys in comparison to one another. And because we're doing this now after the draft, we will be able to talk about the landing spots for each of those guys. Obviously, we hit on some of those guys today, so we'll probably, like, shorten the discussion on those prospects that we talked about in more depth, like a Ty Simpson, already on this episode. But hope to come back, kind of summarize from a quarterback perspective one more time. I'm about to go on vacation, so it might be a little bit before we get to it, but it will get done eventually. So thanks, Jon, for joining. This was a hefty one, but always fun to come back and circle back around once you see where all the players end up. So appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for listening, and we will catch you all soon.